Welcome to the finale of our AI summer course. With me again are Mike Chen and Leda Baggio. Mike is Robeco's head of alternative alpha and Leda is a client portfolio manager. And we're looking decades ahead in this episode. How will AI reshape investment roles, transform the quant fundamental divide, and invent or even necessitate entire new asset classes? Let's take the long view without forgetting today's first principles. Welcome, Mike and Leda. Good to see you again.
Hey, Erika.
Good to be back again.
Mike, there's so many exciting angles to this topic of AI and the future, and hopefully we can cover a good many of those. But let me begin by asking you, what is the one single AI-enabled change that the world and even investors might be underestimating?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Erica. So, you know, as mentioned previously, there are a lot of things going on right now, right? And things are changing very, very quickly. But if I were to pick one single change or single piece of technology, I think that's going to be potentially the most impactful. I would say that's the agentic AI.
Yeah.
So essentially, these are autonomous AIs that can initiate action rather than being, requested by humans or initiated by humans. The AI itself can notice something, make a decision, and then execute on it, and then report to human investors afterwards. I think that's very, very exciting. This ability to be proactive is I think could change a lot of things.
Oh, significant. So on the basis of that, then, considering all of that within the investment universe, will there still be a role for human investors if you look years ahead? Let's just pick a year, 2045.
Yeah, I think there should be a role for human investors.
I'm glad you said that.
There should be. Yeah. But I think the way human and machines are going to work with each other is going to change over time, right? So right now, basically, machines are doing very, very low-level prescriptive tasks for the most part, right? And humans are doing more of the orchestration and planning and certainly the creative work. Okay. Now, I think increasingly, the amount of work that's going to be shifted to machines is going to be more and more. Some of the more potentially creative and thinking work are also going to be shifted to machine. What humans will be doing is human will act as supervisors. So you will actually have humans sitting on top of a bunch of AI agents that can carry out independent tasks and execute autonomously, but human sits on top to sort of supervise and to make sure that, nothing goes wrong, to set the parameter, if you will, on how active these AIs will be. I think, if this agentic AI ever comes to pass, human will focus on, I would think things are actually more fundamentally suited for humans. So things are like creativity, things like big picture, strategic directions, and certainly this supervision role. I think this is how this future may evolve.
Later?
Yeah, and we need to be adaptable, right? To adapt to the new environment.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if you think of our roles, like how they used to be. So if you think of a researcher, right, the way we use Copilot. When I studied, which is many, many years ago, but I used to program, right? To properly program, to give data, to give the code, to get up results, and so on and so forth, analyze, and then go back and see if it's significant enough, and so on and so forth. The way a young researcher, you in your team probably were completely different from that, right? So they would...
Now, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. But so I started even probably before you, Leda.
So, you see, we're talking completely different. So that's already, like the way they use the Copilot and how a researcher's role has developed with time and evolved with time is different from what we had. Just to give an example, similar, it's probably for our portfolio manager. Like if you think in the beginning of the 90s, when we first started our first model, and then probably was still a lot of Excel that you saw back then. It's different nowadays. Right. And so on the CPM side, if you compare it years ago, we'd be building and concentrating on very few little tasks on changing the footnotes on each slide, and now it's just done at once. Or to give you some minimal examples on that. So our role has changed. Yeah. And will be changing with time. In my view, we need to be open to that. And also in 2045 was your question. Yes. So in 2045, I think if we're open towards new roles and the way open to an evolving world, then I think we're in a good spot.
So you both described the world of quant investing and how that might, how it's been and how it's changed up to today. But what about fundamental investing? Ultimately, do you foresee a combination of quant and fundamental investing under the auspices or enabled by AI?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing some of that, right? Actually, so at Robeco, as you know, we have both sides of the investment spectrum, right? We have a very strong fundamental franchise as well as a quant franchise. And, certainly, I can see our fundamental colleagues are very intrigued by these new tools, right? And a lot of them are actually incorporating the tools that quants have developed. For example, this AI stuff, right? A lot of analysts are actually using AI to summarize the day's news, summarize all the broker reports. It really is a productivity booster. Previously, maybe they could read 10 reports, right? Now they can read 50 reports, at a high level, and whatever they find interesting, now they can drill deeper. So certainly fundamental investors are incorporating technology, and I really don't see the reason for them not to going forward, right? As technology become more powerful, more intuitive, right? Nowadays, to access these powerful AI, you don't even need to learn how to program, like Leda said. You just talk to it, right? In human language. So there's no reason not to use it, right? So what I see is actually, fundamental investors incorporating more and more technology in their investment process. At the same time, as I mentioned in earlier podcasts, quant investors have always wanted to answer, questions that fundamental investors were always asking, but previously didn't have a chance to. For example, does this company have good employee sentiment? Are the incentives aligned between the shareholders and the employees, so on and so forth? With these advanced quant tools and data, now we have capability to answer these considered softer, more fundamental investor type of questions. So I do see the two disciplines kind of merging towards each other. Will they completely merge? I don't know, but they are certainly trending towards each other. That's what I'm seeing.
Well, I think we definitely need both of those, Mike, because they do add to each other. It's like an investor today. Would I say to anyone, be 100% quant? No. I mean, you need both disciplines. And in my view, they will coexist. But of course, a fundamental investor will still probably will be missing out, will not be efficient enough if the investor wouldn't be using the AI techniques, because the world is evolving and is becoming much more efficient. And on the other side, we also need the human expertise that the fundamental portfolio manager and fundamental analyst brings on board, because we see lots of dynamics in today's world. And we also need that outside perspective to see the plausibility of everything, the economic rationale, and so on and so forth. So I do think that the two worlds will coexist and will move more towards each other, yes, but will coexist, and we need both of them.
Time for another fun, quick quiz. Are you ready for that? Are you up to it?
Always.
And no relying on AI to give you the answers, right? First question, true or false? By 2045, AI may be able to independently launch a new investment strategy without human input.
True, yeah.
You were too convinced. Wow. Okay, I'm concerned that that's the answer. Then, multiple choice question. Which of the following might be a real asset class by 2045? A, climate mitigation credits. B, algorithm marketplaces. C, data rights. D, all of the above.
Sounds like D.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Apparently, although, I mean, that's subject to opinion, right? And what might happen and unfold. Next question, also multiple choice. By 2045, your trusted advisor might be A, an AI co-PM, B, a Buffett hologram, C, your digital twin, D, all of the above.
I would hope for A, but probably all of the
I'd
above.
go for Buffett.
Yeah, only Buffett, only B. Okay, well.
Definitely not a digital twin. One of me is enough, I think.
But an AI co-PM, it's fine.
That's workable. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll take A and B then. 4. What's a value that we should never outsource to AI?
Your ethical standards.
Yeah, honestly.
I agree. What do firms need most to prepare for an AI future, in your opinion?
Infrastructure.
I would think infra and also just the mindset, right? Promote this mindset of experimentation and trial and error.
Yes.
Because so much of it is still undefined right now, right? We see this tantalizing possibility, but that possibility needs to be translated into concrete action and products. And the only way to do that is to play with it, really just to experiment.
Right. Good. Okay, fill in the blank. In 2045, a portfolio manager's biggest asset might be their
humanity.
It doesn't change. We are in a people's business.
Nice. Then another multiple choice question. Which of these was developed before the word podcast was coined in 2004? A, spam filters, B, chatbots, C, AI generated art, or D, all of the above?
Spam filters.
All of the above.
Indeed, apparently all of the above. Well done, thank you. Leda, earlier you referred to we require a mindset that's flexible. So if you were to kind of extrapolate to at the corporate level, the company level, what is the mindset or even the culture needed within companies to be able to adopt or absorb these techniques successfully?
Well, we need to be open, and we also need to see the cultural differences towards that, or let's say regional differences as well. So if you think on how everything has been evolving, it's been evolving with time. So we've been able to, if you think on the US terms, have been innovating quite a bit, right? China as well, they follow quickly after, and also in their own their own way. If you see Europe, it just lags a little bit behind it because we have the tendency to regulate too much. So so in a way, I do think that that's the way we're going to move. And even if I'm based in Germany, so if you think of Germany in general, we're leader, when it comes to automotive industry. And at the end of the day, we still do not have the automatic pilot, right? So there are other countries that do it, and we've developed it ages ago. And why not? Because of regulation in place. So I think what needs to happen is that we need to move more towards each other. So it doesn't need to necessarily be the first ones, right? To innovate, the first one to innovate. Probably it's also costly, but we need to all be merging on to move towards each other, and to meet up somewhere in the middle, and of course be open for the change.
Yeah, I think that's really important. This whole growth mindset, right? Yeah. Really being open, being agile. Technology is moving too quickly, and there's a lot of competitive advantages to adopt these powerful technology. Certainly there are risks, right? So you need to be also careful about that, not just blindly follow, but you do need to be able to open, and you shouldn't be dogmatic one way or the other, right? You shouldn't be dogmatically say all new technology is bad or say all new technology is good. You really need to be open, examine things, see if it makes sense, and, really experiment. We have a mantra within quant, especially within next gen quant, is that launch and iterate. I really believe launching and iterating is very, very important, especially in this brave new era of AI.
In other words, what? It doesn't have to be perfect the first time round, and just work with it from there? Is that what you mean?
It does. I think perfection is a aim, but I personally don't think it's possible. But you can always improve it. But obviously, we deal with a lot of capital, right? So we got to do it in a very, very careful, in a safe and controlled environment.
Even in the incubator.
That's right. That's why we have the incubator and all the other safeguards. But we do. You do need to allow this experimentation and trial and error to happen, right? Because this is how actually human progress, and this is how we progress in quantitative finance, and I dare say finance in general.
Right. And perhaps that thought leads to another thought around sort of power and democracy within knowledge in the field of learning and knowledge. So would you describe AI as a democratizer or something that concentrates power? So like the first mover advantage, and maybe you can hold on to that.
That's a very, very good question. I think I'll answer it both ways, two ways. I think it's both, actually. I think for the everyday user, AI is definitely a democratizer. For example, traditionally AI, right, has been the province of very, very large companies, right? Like maybe the most biggest asset managers. But now, a few people, asset manager or investor, can actually just spin up an AI and do their work, right? So in that sense, it's democratizing, right? But for the provider of AI tools, the modern day Alphabet, the modern day Meta, because they control the tool itself and so much of the data and ecosystem around the tool, for them, they're gaining an extraordinary amount of power. So it's both, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we also see how the way we program, how the amount of data has also increased, right, in our models.
Mm-hmm.
Like, also things that made sense in the past. Like, if I would think of some new signals that we've integrated, like from big data, like have a signal on the founder-led firms, right? It's like, did make economical sense. We all knew it also beforehand, but just the data was not there. So it's more, we have the data. So it's definitely opened new ways and new doors to that, which is from the other side, need to be careful on which hands the data goes.
Yes.
So it's how much information you want to share. So it's both ways, and I think it's also difficult to distinguish when is what too much and to whom is that too much. But it has definitely opened new ways or new signals, to be developed with time. And how much is it a concentrator as well? We still have the same big names that we hear, but we also hear new ones emerging, right? So already in the chip makers, right? You also hear European names and not only Taiwanese one, right? Or and so on and so forth. So it is definitely has the plus and minuses of it.
And we've all experienced in our personal lives and in our working lives how quickly these tools have changed what we do, even over the past 1 year or 2 years. So if you were to look 5 years ahead, what would be, what would that scenario look like? Would you imagine, Mike, like in the way in which you use AI for investing?
I think, if we're talking about only 5 years ahead, right, which dog years in technology, I think humans will still very much be in the loop, right, very much be in control. If for no other reason than just regulatory perspective, right? Our regulatory setup is that, there must be a human that's accountable for everything, fiduciary responsibility, right? You cannot just point to an algorithm. So I definitely think human will very much be firmly in the driver's seat in the year 2030.
Okay.
So that's kind of my near-term projection.
And on the
but there will be much more agentic system being deployed.
Okay.
And we've always been in the driver's seat. So I'm more. I don't think we'll be substituted fully. I mean, I hear the question several times now, Erika, but I don't think that's happening, right? If I may, like opera. I remember my grandparents when they were going to the opera. They were saying there'll be no one going to the opera anymore. I remember my parents saying it, and I also say it when I go once in a while, and it's still full. And I think people will still be going. So I do think that people will still be in the lead. It's just also that has become a bit more modern. So humans will still be in the lead in 2030, and I think further on as well.
Yeah. So that also points to the aspect of fear, because I think, also, you're saying be flexible. So that means, in other words, don't get stuck in the fear of, resisting the change. But just from a personal perspective, what excites you or what worries you about the pace of change?
I think what excites me is that I can offload a lot of grunt work, to be honest, right? I think somebody said, I don't want AI to do my poetry for me. I want AI to do my laundry.
Right.
Right? I definitely think that AI is going to, I don't know if laundry, but, it can do a lot more.
If only.
More, yeah, exactly. more like, grunt work, like less creative work. So whereas humans can focus on higher stuff, more complicated, maybe more creative work. I think that's what's really exciting, right? Offload the daily nitty gritty, as parents, it takes up a lot of time, right? So hopefully we can offload that. I think what obviously technology is a double-edged sword. I think what's kind of worrying is, certainly with how powerful these machines have already become and is projected to become in the future, right? You can use it either intentionally for ill, or just misuse it by some accident and that create negative results. I think that's kind of worrying, right? I know Leda said there's a lot of regulation in Europe, right? Which is factually true, but I think certain amount of regulation is still warranted, right? But obviously you want to balance regulation with innovation. So I think if we can get it right, so that minimize the ill use, I think that would be a good scenario.
And we often tend to look at the ill use, but what about just AI being wrong or making mistakes?
Oh yeah, that happens all the time, obviously.
That was too quick. Like daily? How often do you see this?
I mean, AI is a probabilistic model, right?
Yeah.
It's all with probability and just gives you the most likely answer or what it thinks is the most likely answer. That's exactly why we need human in the loop, right? Hopefully, the person supervising the AI has some judgment, has some common sense, which, maybe a tall order, but
Indeed.
But at least there's a possibility for humans to have that,
Keep
right?
their role, yes. So earlier, you've both now referred to regulation. So, and we're seeing almost the stereotype, and perhaps it's largely true. So, if you have the scenario where you have U.S. innovation, application from China, and then regulation from Europe, everyone's specializing in their particular areas. How would those scenarios, where those three kind of behavior types or cultural types, if that were to continue, how would that shape the AI investing trajectories over the years?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So I think, the stereotype that U.S. innovate, China replicate, and Europe regulate is not entirely true. I actually think China is very innovative these days, right? So if you look at the number of engineering and science graduates in China, it way dwarfs the amount in the U.S., right? So if anything, I think China, DeepSeek, which what we experienced earlier this year, was another one of those moments, right? It's U.S. tried to slow down China's AI development by regulating the chip, controlling the chip exports to China. And China, some clever Chinese AI scientists just developed new algorithms to get around it, right? So I definitely think that China can innovate. I don't think. I mean, obviously, you should try to control the leakage of IP and keep your edge. But I don't think that's a permanent edge. Really, the permanent edge is to actually develop a very robust scientific ecosystem, right? And have lots of people working in that area. And seemingly China is doing that, right? And to be honest with you, I live in the U.S. What's really kind of worrying to me is that there's certain elements of the U.S. that's kind of anti-intellectual, anti-science. Personally, from my perspective, I don't think that's a good development. I think the U.S. is the country that it is today because it does have, at least historically, have the best scientists in the world, right? And hope U.S. can continue that edge, personally speaking.
Later?
Well, I think we forget in the three countries or regions you mentioned as well, we forget other countries, emerging countries too. Like, for instance, India, Taiwan, we've seen, it's based on market capitalization, an increase on the meaning of such countries as well. So we do see, and we do also have in the regulated Europe, we also see some champions there too. Like I mentioned previously, ASML, and there are other good ones as well, right? So we did start, a lot started from Europe, and it is probably a wake-up call from Europe as well, based on China, US having a leading role. So in that perspective, such changes need to happen also within Europe, and hope that Europe will be more willing to invest, take more risk, not only be the regulated one, but also start doing its own research, less regulation, and it will happen. I'm convinced that will happen as well. And it's not just China and US, but it's also more in the international sphere.
So if we were to use regulation as a proxy for sort of the guardrails and for protecting the industry, what guardrails or protection is non-negotiable?
You can unplug it. Just shut it off if things go wrong.
But what if we don't want to?
Well, yeah, that's another, yeah.
So we're still looking into the future. What's ahead? What can we expect in the world of investing? But now, for anyone who's studying in the field, what would you advise them? How can they best prepare to enter into this field and succeed?
Yeah. I'll answer that question in two ways. So, in terms of what to study, I think it's still very important to learn the fundamentals. Right. For example, fundamental mathematics, you need to learn how to do that. In fact, I think it's critical because if you want to work with AI, you have to understand how is it built and its limitations and its capabilities, right? So you need to dig a little bit deeper. And if you really dig into how AIs work, it is still linear algebra and other fundamental mathematic probability, stuff like that, right? So you need to be able to understand that. Mentality-wise, I think you need to be, what Leda and I discussed, you need to have a growth mindset, you need to be flexible. Things are changing quickly. you might not be able to predict what's going to happen, but you should be able to follow it, right? If things do change. So I think these are very important attributes. And just to be safe, I think you should take up carpentry or plumbing.
Or massaging or nursing, right?
Yeah, I would say don't stop learning. I guess you'd have guessed it by now. So it's just stay hungry, be open, don't say no. It brings nothing at the end of the day. Just stay hungry, keep learning, and best will come.
So let's keep it inspirational. I want to ask you my final question. If you could give us the one blue sky idea, crazy out there idea currently in the works, in the proverbial whiteboard that doesn't yet exist, that listeners might hear about more in the future, what would that be?
Well, I want, we've launched actually already an AI enabled product. I mean, you talked about it in the previous podcast. So the dynamic theme machine ETF. And we've got also something in the making, which is coming very soon. So I would say stay tuned.
Exciting stuff. So that incubator is being productive.
Something is coming out of the incubator very soon.
There you go, Mike.
I'll answer a bit longer term. I think, if agentic AI future ever comes to pass, and that's still an if, right? Mm-hmm. But if it does come to pass, I think it will very likely discover new strategies that we haven't thought of. And that would lead to new product. I'll just leave it at that.
Mike and Leda, thanks so much. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for traveling with us from the sparks of discovery in the lab all the way through to today's rapid momentum and on towards the horizon still ahead. Well, enjoy your summer, and if you'd like more of the inside scoop on AI investing, have a look at the Robeco website for all the highlights.